You are listening to PR Radio Station of America.
In the autumn of 1974, Marion McWhorter was only 21 years old. She was adventurous, determined, and hopeful about the future. Marion had left California and made her way into Oregon, planning to continue north to Seattle and eventually to Alaska, where her family had deep roots through their Athabascan heritage. She was the oldest of 5 children, a role that carried both responsibility and pride. For her younger sister Valerie, just 11 at the time, Marion was not only a big sister, but also a guide and inspiration. In October of that year, Marion found herself at a shopping mall in Tigard, a suburb outside Portland. She used a phone to call an aunt, asking for a ride. That call would become the last confirmed contact anyone in her family had with her. The aunt never ended up meeting her, though years later she revealed that Marion had mentioned a man in a white pickup truck who had offered her a ride. That small detail would not surface until nearly 2 decades later, leaving Valerie and her family with unanswered questions for years. When Marion failed to arrive, confusion quickly turned into fear. At first, there was hope that she had changed her plans or continued her travels elsewhere. But as days passed without word, worry settled in. Valerie remembers being too young to fully understand the gravity of what was happening, yet old enough to recognize the silence that hung over the family home. Their mother may have contacted authorities, but resources were limited and the search was brief. The family was left with fragments of information, no clear leads, and growing despair. Marion's disappearance left her siblings bewildered. For Valerie, it was as if her sister had simply vanished from the world. With no explanation, no trace, and no closure, the family carried on but never stopped wondering. Each holiday, each birthday, carried the weight of absence. Marion was not forgotten, but she became part of a painful family mystery. Valerie later said she could never shake the feeling of loss, even as she grew into adulthood. In 1974, there were no DNA databases, no internet, and limited tools for missing persons cases. Indigenous women like Marion often received less attention from authorities, a reality that compounded the family's anguish. What began as one woman's disappearance soon hardened into a decades-long cold case. For Valerie, that moment in 1974 would shape her entire life. She would never stop looking for her sister, never stop asking questions, and never stop searching through records of unidentified remains. That October day at the shopping mall was the last time anyone saw Marion alive. It was the start of a mystery that would remain unsolved for nearly 50 years. 2 years after Marion's disappearance, in the spring of 1976, a man searching for moss in the remote forests of Oregon's Central Cascades stumbled across something chilling. Near a mountain creek, half hidden in the undergrowth, he spotted a human skull with several teeth still intact. At first he thought his eyes were deceiving him. Then reality sank in. He immediately contacted law enforcement, his voice shaken as he explained what he had found in the wilderness. Sheriff's deputies and state investigators hiked into the forest with the moss hunter leading the way. What they uncovered was more than a skull. Scattered nearby were additional skeletal remains. The bones lay in silence, untouched for years, their presence raising more questions than answers. Nearby, investigators collected personal belongings: a clog-style shoe worn and dirty, a frayed leather coat, a beaded belt that once carried bright colors but was now faded with age, 2 metal rings, and a pair of Levi's jeans decomposed by time and weather. Every item hinted at the life of a young woman, but her name remained hidden. Without a clear identity, investigators gave the case a temporary name: Swamp Mountain Jane Doe. Forensic science at the time could only offer limited answers. Dental records were compared, but nothing matched. Police checked missing persons files, but leads ran dry. In the 1970s, there were no national databases, no DNA sequencing, no instant computer searches. The remains belonged to someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's missing loved one, but authorities had no way to connect her to a family. For Marion's family, hundreds of miles away, the discovery went unnoticed. They were not told. They were still waiting for news that never came. Over time, the case file grew dusty. Investigators moved on to newer cases, and Jane Doe became another entry in the long list of unidentified remains. For decades, her belongings sat in evidence storage, her bones preserved but nameless. Her story faded from the headlines, but it was not forgotten by everyone. Local law enforcement kept the case open, even if leads had disappeared. They knew that somewhere out there was a family still searching, still grieving, still without closure. For the community, the discovery was unsettling. A young woman had died in the forests of Oregon, but no one could say who she was or what had happened to her. For her family, who had no idea these remains even existed, the absence of answers continued to gnaw at them. The name Swamp Mountain Jane Doe lingered in police files for nearly half a century, a placeholder for a story not yet finished. It would take decades of waiting, the rise of new science, and the persistence of a younger sister who refused to forget to finally give the remains a name: Marion Vanetta Nagel McWhorter. For Valerie Nagel, Marion's disappearance was not just a family tragedy. It became the backdrop of her entire childhood. At 11 years old, she struggled to understand why her sister never came home. Birthdays and holidays always carried an empty seat. Conversations about Marion were hushed, filled with uncertainty and sorrow. As Valerie grew older, she realized that no one had answers. The case had gone cold, and there was little she could do as a child. But the memory of her sister's smile, her voice, and her role as the protective older sibling never left her. By the time Valerie was an adult, she had access to resources her parents never did. The internet became a tool for desperate families, and she used it relentlessly. Night after night, she combed through online databases of unidentified remains, scrolling through lists of Jane Does. Each entry was a possibility, a potential clue. She studied facial reconstructions, descriptions of clothing, and vague timelines, always wondering if one of them was Marion. It was painful but necessary. The not knowing was worse. In the 2000s, DNA technology became a lifeline for families of the missing. Valerie submitted her DNA to genealogy websites, hoping that science could succeed where traditional investigations had failed. She uploaded her information to platforms like Ancestry, waiting for matches that might connect to unidentified remains. Meanwhile, investigators had not forgotten Swamp Mountain Jane Doe. In 2010, a bone sample from the unidentified remains was sent to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification. A genetic profile was created and added to the National NAMUS database. It was progress, but still no match. A decade later, another breakthrough came. In 2020, a fresh bone sample was analyzed, producing a stronger DNA profile with unique genetic markers. Still, without family connections, the mystery remained unsolved. Then, in 2023, Valerie added her DNA to Ancestry's database, a decision driven by hope and persistence. Unknown to her, the real breakthrough would come from another branch of the family. In April 2025, a first cousin once removed uploaded their genetic information to Family Tree DNA. That upload became the missing puzzle piece. With genealogical sleuthing, experts finally built a family tree that pointed directly to Valerie. For decades, Valerie had refused to let her sister's memory fade. She never stopped looking, never stopped scrolling through case files, never stopped sending DNA samples in the hopes of closure. When the genealogist contacted her, she felt both shock and relief. After nearly 50 years, the persistence was finally paying off. The nameless Jane Doe from 1976 was about to be revealed as her sister Marion. In June of 2025, Valerie Nagel's phone rang. She had grown used to dead ends and silence, so when she heard the voice of an Oregon State Police investigator on the line, she was caught completely off guard. They asked her if she would be willing to provide DNA for comparison to an unidentified remains case, known as Swamp Mountain Jane Doe. For a moment, Valerie froze. After decades of waiting, after years of scrolling through online files and submitting her DNA to genealogy websites, here was a chance at real answers. Valerie agreed immediately. Days turned into weeks as scientists compared her DNA to the profile extracted from bones preserved for nearly half a century. When the results came back, the truth was undeniable. The unidentified woman found in 1976 was her sister, Marion Vanetta Nagel McWhorter. After 49 years, the question that had haunted Valerie since she was 11 years old finally had an answer. She later told reporters she was very surprised when the call came, but she was also deeply grateful. "I was really glad they found me through DNA," she said. The confirmation brought back waves of memory. Valerie thought of her sister's laughter, of the last time she had seen her, of the empty space Marion left behind. She thought of her mother, who had named Marion after an aunt who died in a boarding school for indigenous children in Alaska in 1940. Their mother had passed away without ever knowing what became of her daughter. Now, nearly 50 years later, Valerie finally had the truth, but she carried the bittersweet knowledge that her mother never lived to see this closure. Oregon State Police went public with the identification that same week. News outlets reported that one of the state's oldest cold cases had finally been solved. Photos of Marion as a young woman appeared beside headlines announcing the discovery. Forensic experts explained how genealogy databases and persistence had cracked a mystery once thought unsolvable. Families across Oregon and beyond saw hope in this story, proof that even the oldest cases could still be resolved. For Valerie, the emotions were complicated. She felt relief in finally knowing the truth, but the pain of loss was sharp. Closure does not erase grief. She admitted that she never forgot about her sister and never stopped searching. Now she knew that Marion had not simply walked away from her life. She likely met with violence in the forests of Oregon, her story cut short far too soon. Yet in the end, Valerie had the answer she needed. Her sister's name was restored, her identity returned, and her story no longer hidden under the cold title of Jane Doe. When Oregon State Police confirmed that the remains long known as Swamp Mountain Jane Doe were in fact those of Marion McWhorter, the announcement carried enormous weight. It was one of the state's oldest unidentified cases, solved nearly 50 years later. Officials emphasized that this identification proved why they never give up on cold cases. Haley Cullertstalder, a state forensic anthropologist, explained that families deserve answers, no matter how many decades have passed. Marion's name was restored, and her story was finally acknowledged publicly. For Valerie, closure came in layers. She no longer had to wonder where her sister was, or if she had simply disappeared voluntarily. The identification confirmed that Marion likely died under suspicious circumstances. Valerie felt both relief and sorrow. Relief that she could finally stop searching, sorrow that her sister's life ended in violence. She told reporters simply, "I never forgot about her." For a woman who had carried this mystery since she was 11, those words carried the weight of half a lifetime. The Linn County Sheriff's Office reopened the case into Marion's death. Investigators began looking again at the details. The belongings found in 1976, the terrain where her remains were scattered, and the long-delayed statement from her aunt about the man in the white pickup truck. Questions resurfaced. Who was he? Did he play a role in Marion's disappearance? Why was that detail hidden for 2 decades? Detectives admit the answers may never be fully uncovered, but they are committed to pursuing every possible lead. Marion's story also highlighted a painful truth. Indigenous women in North America have long faced disproportionately high rates of disappearances and violent deaths. Many cases go uninvestigated or unresolved due to lack of resources and systemic neglect. Marion's family, with their Alaska Native roots, was one of countless indigenous families who lived for decades without answers. Her identification is not only a family's closure, but also a reminder of how urgent it is to address this ongoing crisis. After 49 years, Marion is no longer a Jane Doe. She is remembered as a sister, a daughter, and a young woman whose journey was cut short. Her remains are no longer anonymous bones in evidence files, but are connected to her family, her story, and her community. For Valerie, the journey has ended in truth. For Oregon investigators, it is a victory for persistence. And for the wider world, it is a lesson that technology, advocacy, and determination can bring light to even the darkest mysteries. Marion's story may never have a full resolution in terms of justice, but at least her family now knows what happened. After nearly 5 decades, she has her name back. This is the end of that story. Now tell me in the comments, what's your most unbelievable story? I'll read out the funniest ones in the next video. Do not forget to hit a like button and subscribe. See you.